Buddy, it's your boy Ray, and alongside me is Mac
Good evening.
and Gio.
What is good, folks?
Today we're going to be reviewing some action from the international break and some recent changes around the world of footy. Before we get into it, though, don't forget to follow us on our social medias, both on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is at @house_of_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are both on Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. But let's get straight into it. We're going to dive straight into one of the, most interesting results from this past international break. That actually is still going on at the time of recording. But England 2, Italy 1 away for England in Italy, Mac. We're going to talk about their sort of games that they played over this international break. But that result in itself, I guess, could we just start there? Obviously, a rematch of the Euro final in which it was Italy that came out on top. But in this game, England looked pretty much on top and definitely dominated the game. What were your thoughts on that, Mac?
I would agree, because going into the game, there was a lot more riding on this game for England than Italy, even though prior to this matchup, England had actually not beaten Italy away since 1961, so quite some time. I know both of you weren't born yet, but I know you guys like to debate that I was, but that's neither here nor there. For this matchup, though, I think it showed a lot of pride in terms of having that response, because it's the first time that they had faced in regards in an international level since the Euro finals, of course, with England losing that. So this matchup had a little bit more to it, and England really kind of controlled the tempo, controlled the play style. I understand Italy had a lot more possession, but weren't really decisive with it. Didn't really create a whole lot of key opportunities. I think Pickford only had to be able to make one save through the entire game, if I remember correctly, or at least one clear-cut chance, really. But England really did what they wanted. It felt like in a lot of stages of the field, and their best players really shone out on top. Key contributions from a lot of the young stars that really they're just kind of turning the corner in regards to like the Bellinghams, the Sakas. There's a lot more potential in them. So to see them starting off this round of qualifiers like this, it's only great to see.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely interesting to see the players that are coming in, players that are retaining their spots. Gio, one player that retained his spot was Harry Kane, captain of England, and actually throughout this international break, he became the all-time leading goal scorer for England. Still quite an accomplishment. You could, I guess, argue if he is England's best ever striker. Do you maybe want to get into that now? Jill, what are your thoughts on that? Firstly, the accomplishment, and maybe some of those claims.
First and foremost, I just want to say Harry Kane, when he's playing with England, he's actually a different player. It just goes to show how bad Tottenham are. You don't even have to put a great ball into him, and he will find a way to put that ball into the back of the net. Like, for example, that ball that Saka played, and Harry Kane was marked. So Saka plays across the box to Harry Kane, and he plays it in side foot, very calm, very easy. He just makes everything look so easy. Whether or not he's the greatest England striker, I would say so. But to fully cement that, I think I would like to see some sort of trophy from England. I think it'd be a shame if this generation of England talent goes trophyless, because there's just so much of it and there's so much depth in that. I think to use this depth and to use this team to its maximum capacity, I just don't think Gareth Southgate is the one to lead the squad. But that's just my opinion. But hey, this is all about hot takes. So out with Southgate.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously they did get two very, very important wins. The second one being against Ukraine, Mac, and maybe you have something to add on this Kane debate, but also we're gonna get into talking about some other players as well. And my question to you, if you watched that Ukraine game, Zinchenko was playing for the Ukraine team, and do you think he celebrated that Saka banger when that went in, or do you think he was more of a professional and reserved that for maybe getting back into the Arsenal dressing room.
If we were to speak about that individual moment, I think Zinchenko was more celebrating the moment when Saka twisted and turned Mudryk and left him outside, and then put the ball into Kane to score his goal. I think Zinchenko may have celebrated that one a little bit more, or at least maybe I celebrated that one a little bit more. But who knows? In regards to, just to go back towards the Kane debate, I think it's fair in terms of you can make arguments for or against. Some interesting was passed around Twitter. A lot of people may have saw is that 32 of his 54 goals were scored against San Marino, Albania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Panama, Kosovo, Lithuania, Malta, Andorra, Nigeria, Scotland, Senegal, and Slovenia. And the rest on top of that were 18 penalties. So the argument was really, in big games, he's only really scored 4 goals. So it's the tough part is that with England, they're going to face a lot of competitions in these qualifiers against weaker teams where you can really kind of pad stat in a way, right? But to his credit, you have to be there to be able to do it. And you have to have the quality to consistently be chosen for your country, one of the best countries in terms of world football, with consistent competition behind him. And he's really cleared himself where there's such a large drop-off for what he provides to anyone else. So you can really make the argument anyway. But I think just given that he has that title, and the only reason why that he's not given that crown more so is because of his kind of porous club record. I think that's more so kind of the impact where one kind of spells into the other versus vice versa. Because if Wayne Rooney has this record as an example, he's looked at as a hero of England because he has both, right? Versus they should be looked at as two separate competitions. To switch over from to the Ukrainian game, the Saka goal, pure class, absolutely loved it. In terms of his qualities, kind of just is a pinnacle, kind of a little star in terms of how on the top of everything else what Saka's doing for club as well as country, where I would argue, aside from I would maybe say Kane, he's maybe Bellingham as well. This may come up, but he's probably the third name on the team sheet, no matter what, under any circumstance. And it was interesting in going back to the Italy game where it got to the point where after the red card, Foden, who had come on as a substitute, after Luke Shaw got the red card, Southgate ended up subbing off Phil Foden, keeping Saka on, who had played the entire game, to then later sub him anyway, right? So you could have just made that switch anyway. He's like, no, defensive effort, I need the help here. I can't take off my main boy. So it's you can kind of see there is a more so a pecking order, I would say, and Saka is definitely up there on that list for England.
Yeah, for sure. The performances he put simply speak for themselves. The club form really has carried on for this international break, and like you said, Mac, I think Gio, it's very hard to argue that Saka shouldn't be one of those first names on the team sheet. But I guess going back to your comment about maybe Gareth Southgate, but maybe he's not the right man for the job. I think he did try to change things a little bit in this Ukraine game. James Maddison got the start, and players like Conor Gallagher and Ivan Toney did get on to get some minutes and still play for this team. My thing is, Gio, I think still John Stones, Harry Maguire, I think is the best pairing for him, but I would have liked him to try something out. Maybe calls for Tomori or maybe Margay getting some minutes, seeing how things are. These two games were probably the most challenging ones. Italy and Ukraine, they have to play Malta and North Macedonia. So in the summer, maybe there will be some change there. I would expect it, definitely, with maybe no disrespect to the latter teams that I just mentioned. They might be considered more of the weaker teams in that group. Do you expect some changes there to see some fresh faces? Or do you think Southgate will really stick to his core, what he's really been doing?
I think it's important that he does kind of switch it up, because it's easy to play with your starters. Your starters are your starters. They're the top of their own club teams. In every aspect. You have to use these games as opportunities for real game situations. What if someone picks up a knock, or what if there's a bug, and which there was a bug in Qatar where players were sick. So what if things of that nature happen? Players get injured right before a tournament. Then you have to adjust. How does he adjust? And we haven't seen that from him quite yet, and we can't say that he's been successful because we haven't seen it. So I would love to see it, to see whether he's able to put up a great performance with say a B side squad, and still get the best out of his guys. So yeah, if the points and everything and the qualifications are already in their favor, yeah, I would love to see it.
Interesting to note as well. For me personally, Jude Bellingham wearing the number 10 jersey and being starting, I think, for both games, which is again something other than I think Declan Rice, not something we've really seen in terms of constants in that midfield. So, Mac, I guess for you, does this mean Southgate is moving towards those two guys as his main go-tos, and then filling in the other midfielder, be it Cam Phillips, Jordan Henderson, or maybe even someone else later on? What do you think about sort of his selection and team selection?
I think in terms of team selection wise, they have to be careful because in regards to minutes, especially for these younger players like the Bellinghams, the Sakas, they're playing week in, week out for the club. They're playing full 90 minutes in most cases. And in regards of these tournaments that have come hard and fast, especially after the COVID pandemic, where minutes are racking up for these young players at an astonishing rate. And you have to be really worried about the kind of the deterioration of their muscles in terms of being able to be competitive. I understand how I saw a stat that I think Bellingham at his age has played more minutes than any football player in the history of soccer in terms of competitive starting minutes, and Saka is right up there within the top 5. So it's worrying there. So I think there has to be a look at where, okay, you played your 2 toughest games in all actuality, the toughest game away at Italy, and you're going to be able to bring in that squad rotation where you'll have other players coming in, maybe some youth players that you want to be able to sign caps to where you can kind of lock in their nationality. I think that more so is what he should really look at, is that if there's opportunities there, especially against these kind of weak, quote unquote, weaker teams within the group, because there's 2 teams that are going to qualify out of this 5 group that they're in. So it's very, theoretically, it's quite an easy path for England to look at themselves like, oh, given the start here, we should already be clear. Yeah, I understand it's still very early in the day, but and in the cycle, but that's how they should look at it. In the big matches, though, when they do start to lead up the tournaments, I think that's very much what they'll look to do. And that's more where they'll re-solidify it. So I do agree with you, but I think he's going to like, you know what? I have all my answers here. The questions I needed answered are done. Let's continue to see if we can cycle in and then kind of build up other players and see if there's something else works. But we always have the old reliable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what's been working so far, and I'm sure he's going to revert to that if there's important games to come. But yeah, just interested to see what may come in the summer. Maybe a little bit of downtime for those starters, like you guys mentioned, that have played so much for their clubs. That maybe some other fresh faces can come and maybe add something else. But let's move on from, I guess, one team that performed really well to another team that's performed really well in this international break, and that's France, with Gio victories over the Netherlands 4-0, and then against Ireland as well 1-0. Honestly, for me, if you ask me who is favorites at the back of the World Cup to win the next World Cup, it's got to still be France. And Gio, what are your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree with you more. They just look so fluid. Obviously with the news that Mbappe is the youngest France captain to do so, he's flying too. And I think Griezmann just loves playing for his country too, because when he plays for France, it's like it's a completely different person. But no, we love to see the work rate. I think their team, I think down the line they might come into issues in terms of in my opinion, their defense might be a sort of their Achilles tendon. Some would say, like a Benjamin Pavard, I don't think is going to be as critical as he is, come a couple of years down the road. But yeah, I think they should look to kind of fill that hole. But again, with that being said, a lot of their key guys that they would have wanted at the World Cup weren't at the World Cup. Like Christopher Nkunku, in that midfield, they were very thin, I'd say. Obviously, without Pogba, without, I think, Camavinga, or there was Tchouaméni. It was one of those two. But yeah, without them, they still looked very good. So I think with them going forward, yeah, they definitely are the favorites going into the Euros, and I can't see them doing too poorly there either.
Yeah, I mean, the let's just go talk about the Netherlands game. First of all, I relied mostly on highlights for really looking at what happened in the game, but I don't know if you guys caught this. In the middle of the game, Tchouaméni picks up the ball and then just tosses it because of I guess the air pressure is not there, but I would never think of doing that in a professional game. Maybe in a drop-in when we play together, just like a friendly game. If things are not right, maybe I'll stop the game. But maybe that's how France saw this game, Mac. Maybe they thought it was a friendly, it was wrapped up, and that is pretty much the approach, I guess, because France really got off to a hot start for that, and it was all going to go one way for that game. What are your thoughts on the France performance?
France is an absolutely terrifying team. Even I do agree with Gio that they're a team that defensively potentially that could be a weakness. But if you ask me in terms of who has the biggest holes in their game, or how many holes do they theoretically have, France has the least. They really are kind of strength with strength. They're probably as deep a team in comparison to any other European team, especially. And if you were asking me if I were to take in regards to like France versus the field to win this upcoming Euros, the argument we made is that you should take France because of how deep of a team they are, and in terms of any injuries that they do have, the flexibility they have. That they could have their captain, who was out in this round of fixtures, Hugo Lloris, and Mike Maignan, that came in and played very, very well. Arguably, in my opinion, is a much better keeper than Hugo Lloris could ever dream of being. It's astounding that they have. And I do want to check in terms of the eye roller for the Mbappe captain is that Griezmann asked to be the captain, and they still gave it to Mbappe anyway, which for me, my guy's asking for it, given what he's done for the country. You got to give it to him, but I do understand to some extent is like you want to set up the next, theoretically, when Hugo Lloris does retire, the next 10 years for Mbappe. But it's one game. Come on, give it to Griezmann. But that's just my thoughts there. Overall, the team's phenomenal. There's almost kind of no question. I do. One player I did want to be able to kind of broach about and talk about was Kula Muani. He started playing as a striker in the first matchup against Netherlands, and I think he played out wide in the second matchup. I think so. He's a player with a lot of flexibility, and a lot of teams are coming around to kind of. Especially the bigger clubs across the world, looking to be able to potentially pick him up from RB Leipzig. I think he has 13 goals so far this season, starting off as a striker for a team, so he's playing very, very well. And it's only his first year in the Bundesliga as well. So I wanted to ask you guys that, I don't know if you watched him when he was playing, because he did kind of had that famous moment against Martinez in the World Cup final where he got a shot saved in the last second. But since then, he's really turned to kind of put that behind him and played very well. If there is a team that kind of you would see potentially him being poached off this summer, in terms of maybe if we're going to stick to something that we might be a little bit more comfortable with in the Premier League, is there a team that you guys think that he would be a good fit for?
I could go first, Gio, if you don't mind. Personally, because, and this might allude to what we might talk about later on this podcast, he could definitely fit in at Spurs, given that Harry Kane could be leaving, and then Nagelsmann might sign for Spurs, and they obviously worked together before, so potentially could be a reunion or of some sort, and definitely fits the profile that they would need. Personally, that's one of mine where I could see him, but maybe you see him somewhere else. Gio, what do you think?
Spurs is a good shout. Max licking his lips. I don't know why. It's kind of scary. Honestly, hey, you just gotta link him back to the squad. I would love to see a striker at Man U, like an out and out striker. I would love to see him there. So I would say Man U. We can't get Kane for a good price and not having to give up too much. Why not increase that young core and sign a player like him?
I absolutely love that. I do want to say, in terms of the Kolomwani to Man U, I think again Kane or Oshman are probably more favored there. So I do like the idea of him going to Spurs with him and Kulusevski, where he's able to play off the runs behind him, or even potentially if Son were to be the one to leave this summer, playing off the left wing, because that's where he has traditionally played prior to being a striker. So a lot of comparisons. I know it should be taboo in France where they make this comparison to Henry, where the winger shifting out to play striker, really 6'2", tall, fast, very, very gifted on the ball. So it's obviously you shouldn't do that comparison because we've seen that go the other way with Martial. I'm sorry.
That's not fair. That's not a fair comparison.
But I'm just saying, in regards to that type of player in the Premier League, maybe playing off a bigger striker potentially with Kulusevski on the other side, I thought that was very, very interesting. And the Nagelsmann, we'll talk about that later. That's a little tease.
Yeah, just a little tease, guys. So on that note, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll be back with some more international football to talk about. So stay with us. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We're going to continue our international break discussion with a quick mention about Portugal's Cristiano Ronaldo, further extending his goal-scoring record to 122 goals in 198 caps. And Gio, just to read out a stat here, goals per match, 0.62. More, I guess you can say still a very, very healthy return for a player who you may argue now is beyond his prime. And regardless of your opinion personally on how his career has gone, that is definitely still an astonishing record. So, Gio, what are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I think it's a good thing for Cristiano Ronaldo. I was thinking about screaming into the mic and saying something that Cristiano Ronaldo loves to say, but I'll save Mac the headache on this Tuesday night. But the fact of the matter is, you can see that he's really enjoying club football and in international football. He's enjoying football in general again. You can see it in how he talks to the press, and his interviews. Of course, he came out and said, he touched on his time in the Premier League, his return to the Premier League obviously didn't go as planned, and he really sort of, in a way owned up to it, and saying that, that's not the way, that's how you really act, in tough situations. But for him to own up to it is a good example for, these younger footballers who, are really kind of get exactly what they want. If you don't get the play time you deserve, or they think they deserve, they kind of request a transfer, and that's kind of how it goes. But yeah, along with that, it's just nice to see that he's still very capable, and I think we, as fans, we almost thought, maybe it's declining. Yes, it is declining, but you can still see, the talent that he provides onto the pitch. Granted, against Liechtenstein and Luxembourg, but for him to pull off those things, not any average player can just pull off those things.
Definitely not. And with that, Portugal now leads Group J in that Euro qualifying group, and still a great accomplishment, still helping the team, and I think definitely will be still part of that team in the coming, I guess, international pictures. But I guess let's move on now to Group A, Mac, where Spain was in action over the last couple of days. Firstly, impressive win over Norway, 3-0, but suffered a loss at the time of recording, against Scotland. So very, very, I guess, polarizing results here. What are your overall thoughts on their performances?
I thought sometime whenever you're playing a game of football against a bunch of Scottish boys, you're going to have a rough day. And unfortunately, Spain could not handle the heat. And Roger's poor form afterwards, the interview, you suck. And want to let you know that. You to me, you suck, and you're just jealous. Haters going to hate. And as a hater, I would know. Moving on. In regards, though, for Spain, that first performance against kind of a Holland-less Norway, it is really tough to be able to kind of garner anything out of a performance like that, where there were some moments where Norway did look good. Odegaard had a couple of moments on the ball that he showed some quality, but there isn't that kind of same level of threat where on a break, similar in a lot of ways to kind of that Sweden with Zlatan back in the day, where as long as you have that kind of on the threat, maybe differently versus maybe more of a set piece, but more on a break for Holland, where against that Norway team, you can have a little bit more damage. So you can argue that's a soft fixture. But going against the team, I would argue is probably their main competition to finish in the top two spots within Group A, Scotland, and really having majority of the ball, not really having a creative sense in that final third to pick a final pass, to be able to make sure that the key run's made at that right moment, and your failure defensively to clean a couple things up, I would argue led to, even though they only scored twice, the three biggest chances. I think it was the Scottish striker. His name escapes me, but he actually even had a breakaway before the end of the first half as well, that he just kind of hoofed over the net. So overall, I think Spain, we should start asking the questions. Okay, we understand how they're going to play, but are they talented enough to play like that way going forward? Because they're consistently having a ton of possession against these kind of lower level teams that are below them, let's say, in the FIFA rankings, but aren't coming up with the goods. Because I would argue their front three or attacking rotations not the level of where it should be or historically has been, where they were at some points top of the footballing world, right? So huge discredit to them, and leaves me a lot of questions going forward, even though I'm sure, even though it's still a couple of years away, of course, that they're going to make the Euros. But this, unless things, I guess, start changing and they start progressing into maybe something a little bit different, a new evolution of what they can be, they may not be as much of a threat going into that tournament as they normally are.
Okay, I think that was Lyndon Dykes, Mac, the striker you're referring to. But Gio, I guess not the result most we're expecting, though going away to Scotland is always going to be a difficult game. But just want to read out some interesting kit numbers for that Spanish team. Again, now they have moved on, and now it's Luis de la Fuentes who's taking over for Spain, picking out new players for this round of fixtures. Gavi handed the number 9 jersey, and Dani Ceballos with the number 10 jersey. So definitely an interesting way to start. But Gio, do you agree with Mac that some of the quality that they have on that team just doesn't strike fear into some of the bigger boys in Europe at this point? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I would agree with him. I think people are buying in a little too quickly on the Spanish side. I think they still lack a lot in terms, one being their attack, and two being, yes, these midfielders are good and they play for very big clubs, but they haven't proven anything yet. They've proven that they are great individual players, but on the team side, they do still struggle. And at this point, when you're already, they're still trying to build, but they're so reliant on these younger guys that haven't proven themselves yet. So realistically, this can turn very bad very quickly. Or if Spain is lucky, they, a Spanish striker happens to have a great year and gets called up and does well, and they kind of go deep in the tournament, and these star midfielders actually can come together and really just perform out of their minds. Then people will continue to think that Spain are back. But in my opinion, I don't think Spain's quite back. I think they still have a lot of work to do. They still have a lot to prove. Again, that game against Morocco, kind of is a sure tell sign that they're not quite back. Spain of old would have held the ball, dragged them out a little more, and scored that one goal and held the ball the rest of the game, and Morocco wouldn't be able to even touch the ball. So yeah, Spain of old definitely holds a standard, and I don't think they're quite there yet.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do moving forward. Again, they are a little bit in a transitional period. Interesting to note, Joselu was given his debut for Spain. He's 33 years old, and actually did come on and score 2 goals in that game against Norway. But I guess a question for you guys is definitely with, Spain, because the other, real out-and-out striker they have that they've relied upon is Alvaro Morata. But even just looking across a couple of teams in Europe and even in club football, just mentioned Joselu, the striker that played for Spain. For Germany, the striker Fulkrug, you have Giroud playing a striker for France, and all of these players that I'm mentioning, Choupo-Moting for Bayern Munich, not the most flashy number nines that you could, I guess, think of at the moment. But Mac, is there maybe something that I guess is shifting towards more so teams moving away from that quote unquote false nine and having more of a out and out strikers so that they can have a more, I guess, concrete system moving forward. Definitely internationals because you don't get as much time with these players. It might just be more simple if these guys don't play club football club football with each other. That if you just integrate a out and out striker and then build around that, that might be the way to go. Just based on some of the performances that I've seen. What are your thoughts on that, Mac?
I think that's a fair way to kind of assess where kind of international football is a moment, but I think with international football more than ever, it's really situational because you can have a Giroud because you have an Mbappe, right? Where you have the players around them where, okay, we have a striker that's going to kind of do more of a traditional hold-up play, link play, not really be that, maybe that kind of that star striker a la the Benzema, if we're going to continue the France comparison, where Giroud arguably is a better fit because of the pieces around. But the question is that not just for, let's say, individually Spain, I would argue their attacking front three, they're also part. It's not just really the striker, but all their eyes are pointed at because they're not getting the goals, right? You could argue the back four, midfield three is up there with the rest of the world. It's just you don't have the attacking talent to be able to put the ball in the back end, and that's going to come across the front three traditionally, especially over the last couple of years in world football. But because they don't have anything there, everyone just kind of zeroes in on that kind of that. I think that easier talking about that number 9 position. As an example, with England with Kane, right, where you have a striker that's going to kind of, he is a little bit different than more of a traditional striker, but because he is bagging away goals, if the wingers beside him are not bringing the goods as kind of as consistently, the questions aren't there, right? So I feel like it's very situational. It's just this Spain team lacks that presence across the board, where arguably everyone in their front three is. Yeah, like the other big teams, if we go against the Germanys, the Frances, the Englands, even the Portugals, I would argue, in Europe especially, would I take any of their front three over the worst player on any of those other teams' front three? No, I wouldn't. There's not a real threat there. So unless there's kind of players coming in youth-wise that are kind of going to bring that presence, I think that going forward, they'll really have no choice but to dominate possession really 80% and pray they don't get scored on, and maybe they get lucky a little bit the other way around, because unfortunately they don't have the same level of depth. We don't see David Villa or Fernando Torres walk into that door anytime soon.
I mean, some would argue right now if they did walk through that door, they might start. But on the flip side, Gio, I guess Scotland don't really need that. Scott McTominay with 4 goals in 2 games. Why would you need a striker when your star midfielder is putting those types of performances and contributing to that? So I guess give us some of your thoughts on his performances so far.
First of all, correction, not a star midfielder, but increase his own value. So we love to see it. We love to see it, boys. Honestly, hey, he's a leader on that Scottish team. He kind of has to do more. He kind of has to open his range in terms of, sometimes even, being a center back or like, attacking a little more. Has the freedom to do a lot more things. Doesn't have. Well, he does have set roles, but again, those roles are a little bit more expanded to an extent. Can be like a, if you want to compare it to someone, for an example, would be Zinchenko on a Ukraine. He's able to do those things for the club, for the countryside.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think it's great for him. Of course, he hasn't been utilized as much as of late in the club side for him to continue to get that confidence. So Man U are still playing, a fair amount of games. Again, to slot him in and for him to still have that confidence to play, go out there knowing that he can contribute to a team, whether it's defensively or offensively, that's never a bad thing. So shouts out to Scott McTominay, shouts out to Scotland.
Yeah, shouts out to Scotland, Mac. They are, as you noted here, looking like a powerhouse. You noted here they failed to qualify back-to-back international tournaments, but they look to be in contention with that result against Spain to maybe even top this group and be a shoo-in for that European tournament in a couple of years' time.
Absolutely. They were definitely through kind of a dry spell there where a lot of the tension, I think, going into the World Cup even was, could Scotland make it or could Wales make it? Could both of them make it, right? There was a lot of talking points around that. And unfortunately, for us Scottish fans, they didn't pull through and on that end. But they look to be in a good position given the group that they are in. And the win against Spain, which is, of course, going to be their hardest fixture. So even if they go on to lose the reverse fixture, they should still be in a fair shout. Only the top two of the five need to make it, so they're in a position, considering where things stand right now, where they could see themselves kind of making it to another European qualifiers, European Cup competition. I think, though, the second half of the stat, it's 4 goals in the last 2 games for Scott McTominay, which is as many as he scored for Manchester United in the last 15 months. So it's quite a long time period in terms of, and where I argue, and I think this is a question I don't know if we want to go too in depth, but I'm curious to see what you guys think, is that the difference between players playing for club versus country, where you've seen a lot of kind of cases, and I hate to pick on Manchester United, I'm sorry, Gio, but Harry Maguire, Scott McTominay, they play for their country so well, where they do a lot better than they do with their club performance. I think there's a lot to say in terms of situation, but and you can kind of look individually. Like Scott McTominay, when he's ever played for Manchester United, it's in a rigid 4-2-3-1 position where he plays as a holding mid behind a 10. What he's played so well with for Scotland these last couple of games, it's in a 3-4-3 where he's able to be a box-to-box midfield and be kind of who he is, right? So it's interesting to see that if club managers are, and I don't know really who to blame that. Is it Scott McTominay because he has quality, but he's not able to adjust play correctly? Is it the manager for not putting him in a position where they're going to be successful, or choosing who they want to be successful and sacrifice other players, right? So I think it's very interesting, and these last 2 games are very much a microcosm of kind of where. Even though, again, Manchester United, great turnaround in terms of what they've done, but some individual players for certain countries versus club, there's such a disparity in terms of their play. I don't think it's just because, once you put on that badge, it just feels different, right? I think that's a little bit too... there's no evidence behind. There's very little evidence behind that you can actually kind of quantify there. So I just find that interesting. I'm curious to see what are your guys' thoughts in terms of players like that, or do you have any other examples that comes to mind when we're talking about that split between club versus country and the performance? And it just gets me thinking. Well, like I said, why is there such a large disparity? Gio?
Well, I mean, if you're talking situational, we saw it at the World Cup. We saw Chelsea's Hakim Ziyech really just be Hakim again, of the Ajax Hakim. So, like obviously when you talk about situation, he's not in a great situation at Chelsea. He gets starts, but he's not put in good situations that kind of benefit his play style. So, again, that's definitely one of them that we've saw recently. So yeah, no, it happens a lot for these types of players, or even I'm sure Ray's gonna bring it up. I'll let you bring it up. But he's definitely a man who's done a Chelsea jersey, a Man U jersey, and a Inter Milan jersey as of late. But Ray, please go ahead.
Perhaps a man like Romelu Lukaku, is that who you might be referring to?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, it's different, right? With Scott McTominay, I think he's given more freedom, and with playing in a big team like Man U, you are expected. I guess there's more pressure in a sense playing for Man U than potentially your international team, where fewer eyes are on you, and you feel more. Not that any professional player would play less for a club team than a country team, other than notable exception of Gareth Bale. You still, want to perform for your international team as best as you can because you're representing your country. Instances where players like Harry Maguire are performing better could also be maybe the system fits them better. They're less exposed with sort of the style of play that the England national team are set up with. And so I guess case by case, but yeah, it's interesting to know. And I don't know if there's anyone exactly to blame. It's just something that maybe these players can take into account. And if they're not getting the best out of them, if their clubs are not getting the best out of them and they're not performing, I guess, to that standard, maybe they can seek a move elsewhere. And I know Gio might find that music to his ears. Maybe Harry Maguire and Scott McTominay leaving the club to perform better elsewhere. Hey, it's not the end of the world. I think it's fair to say for Gio for that. But yeah, so let's wrap this part up. And I think just before we take a break, we're gonna quickly mention day of recording and time of recording. The Canadian national team just finished their game against Honduras, in which they won 4-1. And even earlier, 1-0 over Curacao this past international break. And so I guess I'll toss it to you first, Mac. Two very important wins for Canada, which are very much a good turnaround after being, I guess, disappointed in the World Cup. What will we learn from these results from Canada?
Well, I think it's clear to say there is kind of a larger separation given how these results have gone for Canada and the quality that they've played. I saw the majority of the first half of this game against Honduras, and they're in clear control in terms of possession, really had all the chances, could really do what they want, and should have even come out into halftime leading by 3 or 4, maybe in 5 goals, because they had a lot of opportunities. And in terms of the depth of talent and their flexibility of ways that they can play, they're very much up there in terms of the levels of CONCACAF, where the talk has been probably, I would argue, for as long as can be, where it's kind of Mexico, USA, them fighting for kind of in the hierarchy in their own tier. And you can definitely feel where Canada's maybe not just knocking on that door, but squarely putting themselves in the middle of that conversation, where they might be in a position where tournament after tournament for this CONCACAF level, considering the players coming up for Canada, where they're going to consistently be in that conversation and potentially again down the road overtake them, because there's a lot of talented footballers coming out of Canada right now, and players like even Alistair Johnston going on to play for Celtic, and I think he's played every minute in the Scottish Premier League season for them so far. So players like that just going out, branching out, is just going to kind of further kind of grassroots wise build out kind of what I get all of us have been really looking forward for quite some time. So it's great to see, and hopefully they can continue out these performances. But I do think that this does tee up a matchup for them against the United States away in the USA for the semifinal matchup for this Nations League, whatever a cash grab this thing is. So it should that result in and itself will be a fascinating game to watch, and definitely something I'm excited to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely a marker to see how well they are, I guess, progressing, Gio, given the fact that, again, I guess you can say disappointing in the World Cup, but again, after returning to the World Cup for such a long time, you wouldn't really expect much. But now, with these performances, Jonathan David getting on score sheet, Kyle Lyon with 3 goals in these last 2 games, there's pedigree now up there, and so you'd expect, and going into now, the World Cup is going to be a few years away, but going into that and with that mindset, I think Canada has to approach it in a way that, they have to pull up, be definitely conversation in the top 3 of the CONCACAF teams, but even make a name for themselves and potentially move to even number 2, number 1, given the fact that, the World Cup's going to be here and all eyes are going to be here. So what are your thoughts on that, Gio?
I mean, look, no, it's great that they're performing against these sides. Again, Canada being where Canada is, having to play CONCACAF squads more frequently. You only, they kind of play at, their competition level in a way. They're not able to compete with, those larger scale international clubs. But yeah, so that is always going to be kind of Canada's Achilles heel in a sense. I hate that I use the term again, but they only play these certain teams over and over again, and they're unable to face these bigger sides and gain that experience. Again, from what they gained from the World Cup is that there's work that needs to be done. There's a different level of class. It's not that they weren't able to compete; they were able to compete, but it's a different level of class in terms of being clinical and really taking your chances and being consistently playing at a high level. So I think for as much as they do, succeed against these CONCACAF teams, they really got to hone in and really play well against these bigger sides. I don't know where they're going to get the practice from because, the schedule is the schedule. But, they need to take that motivation from the World Cup and sort of just kind of show like they're levels ahead of these CONCACAF teams. So hopefully, whenever they're planning friendlies or whatever of that nature, they're able to set up friendly against these larger nations in terms of football.
Yeah, for sure. And so we're going to continue seeing how that progresses as we're very excited for that World Cup when it comes around. But let's take one last break here, guys, and we'll be back just touching on a couple of changes that are happening in the world of footy. So stay with us. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We're going to now discuss some changes taking place in the managerial footy world. It's been announced over the international break that Bayern have fired Julian Nagelsmann and actually hired Thomas Tuchel to take over at this point of the season, which is kind of weird. And especially now some of the, I guess, background numbers that you looked into make it even more of a head scratch for me. So walk us through some of that and what your thoughts on that managerial changes.
Well, first of all, I do want to say, in terms of if we were to script like a Hollywood club making some sort of change for the team, if this was, let's say, like on Ted Lasso, kind of like the Apple TV show that's been going on, like this is kind of the storyline that we're working with here, where it kind of seems make believe, but also very far fetched and a little bit crazy. So let's break down the timeline here. So less than 2 years ago. So not that long ago, in 2021, Bayern reached out to RPB Leipzig to be able to bring on Julian Nagelsmann. They paid 25 million euros to be able to bring him on, and then gave him a 4-year contract with 30 million euros. That's, roughly speaking, 55 million euros they shelled out for this guy. So if he doesn't get a new contract or doesn't sign on to a new job, that's how much they still pay out. They signed him for a 4-year term. And then less than halfway through that, they let go of him, of course, bring on Thomas Tuchel to only sign him to a 2-year contract. So theoretically, their contracts are going to expire at exact same time. So you're paying 2 managers right now after already paying so much money to be able to bring somebody else in. But again, why would this happen in terms of this timeline? Right now, they're 1 point behind in the Bundesliga. They won it last year. They're in a quarterfinals in a favorable draw in the kind of their FA Cup, which is the Pokal Cup. So they're in a fair matchup there where they could still very much get in there. And they have not dropped a game in the Champions League this year and just knocked out PSG, one of the teams that, again, maybe not the best, but one of the favorites for the tournament. So you think right now their stock is at all-time high, and instead, you know what we're going to do is we're going to fire him because we see Tuchel on the sidelines not doing anything, and he's been on the sidelines for quite some time now. So I don't understand why, unless they're the only. I don't know how you guys feel. Maybe I'm stealing the answer here, but they're like, oh, Pep, Man City, what are we going to do? Tuchel, let's go, boys. This is the best option. But is it really worth theoretically that much, considering? And I know I'm going along here. I apologize. Where they brought him in as kind of like a culture shift. We want to be able to change how Bayern's run. We don't want kind of the continuously flow of like the Ancelotti manager dropping in for a 2-year window, dropping out after winning the Bundesliga, and maybe we'll get lucky, right? We want to have a culture shift, and even that came at the loss of some of their kind of larger known players kind of being exited out, or even their core players that you would argue as like Bayern legend, like Neuer or Thomas Muller, where they even went to fire Manuel Neuer's goalie coach, who was his best friend, while he wasn't there due to when he was injured. So they're trying to have a culture change, but then they change and go backwards to kind of maybe more of an interim manager only for 2 years. So I don't get it. What are your guys' thoughts about this change? Or, do you have more banter that you want to bring up?
Let me just step in here. They see who they're facing. And they thought to themselves, who beat them last time? Oh, Thomas Tuchel and Chelsea. So if anyone can get it done, if it's not Pep himself who shoots himself in the foot, it's Thomas Tuchel. So I mean, in terms of a timeline, it's kind of a strange time to do so. But I guess they're overall just really fed up with the lack of domination. They're just so used to dominating everything and things really just falling into their lap. But yeah, I think this year, especially in the Bundesliga, they didn't feel comfortable, on their throne as Bundesliga champions for so long. So they decided to make that change. Again, the timing of the change very questionable. I thought it could have waited, but I guess they don't want, if they're gonna possibly, roll out of their version of the FA Cup, or possibly not even winning the Bundesliga, they have to go all out and all in on trying to win, this Champions League. And if they don't see that Julian Nagelsmann has brought the best out of the boys, or use their new signings to the best of what they think that they can do with them, then the board makes the final call, and if they think this is the best time to make that change, then it's the best time to make that change.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely the Bayern board will know much more about Bayern and football and the German league than all of us combined will ever know. But still, very very strange decision. Screams Chelsea's January transfer policy. To me, at this time, just doesn't make sense. But maybe they have something else in mind. The only thing I can think of is, though they didn't concede against PSG and they had a great Champions League run, in the league they, I think, have been set back a couple of times, and Tuchel obviously managed in the German league before, did very very well with Dortmund, and so he might be able to shore up this Bayern team that at times leaks unnecessary goals with Tuchel's sort of play style, being a little bit more defensive. And so that might be the only change I can think of. And yeah, basically, apart from Bayern and Bayern, Real, and PSG, you could argue these are the teams that, even if they don't win the league, they're gonna be looking to push for the Champions League, and so that's the only reason why this change makes some sense to me. Maybe they think Tuchel, with him running in the past, has that know-how to take them into that Champions League final and potentially win it. But it's going to be very interesting because this Saturday they do face Dortmund. So Bayern will face Dortmund, Tuchel's old team, and so that's going to be a very fiery beginning to his Bayern career. So we'll keep an eye out on that, guys. So that being said, let's touch on now another managerial change. Gio Spurs have, as we expected, parted ways with Antonio Conte. Mackie noted here that it's confirmed that he left by a mutual decision. Whatever you want to read into that. My understanding is his assistant coach is now taking over for the end of the season, and then I think they'll probably look to sign a permanent coach at the end of the season, maybe in the summer. Gio, what are your thoughts on that whole scenario and debacle?
Conte got exactly what he wanted. I think more than anything, he was just really fed up with, one, the media, two, what he thought was the lack of desire from the players. And he just didn't want to coach the side anymore. And how else was he going to get out of it? The media, outbursts. So, I think, John Levy had to do something about it. They say mutual consent just to not to leave a bad taste by anyone, to kind of weather the storm. Kind of slow down the the wildfire. But it was in my opinion, I think they should have just sacked him. It would have created more. It would have been better for the culture if he did that. That if you don't want to be at this club, if you keep shaming the club, you're not going to be at this club. So I think by mutual consent doesn't look as good as sacking for Tottenham's sake. And then, again, I still think Conte just got exactly what he wanted. He played his cards exactly the way he needed to get to mutually part ways. But honestly, I just feel bad. Through all this, there's only one person you can really feel bad for is Julian Nagelsmann. Obviously, he parts way with Bayern and then instantly gets rumored by, to get hired by Spurs. I don't think a person can have a worse week than that. So, hey, man, if you're listening, which I doubt you are, but if you're listening, hey, I feel for you. It's not a great week, but hey, you're still getting paid. So, maybe you can come. Maybe you can go to Spurs, not come to Spurs. I'm not a Spurs fan by any means. Maybe you can go to Spurs and, recreate the culture there. But who knows? But yeah, I think Conte is the only real winner here.
Yeah, no, definitely. As we expected, Mac, but now a lot of what we expect is Spurs to still, they're in a top 4 position. They're going to try to achieve that top 4 position and reevaluate, see if they can get still a high quality manager come the summer. What are your thoughts about how they approach the rest of the season and who could they potentially sign and what sort of profile of coach should they approach to sign in the summer?
So I'm going to disagree with Gio here. I think Conte is a loser because I think it's been proven to shown that his style of management is, along with Jose Mourinho's of the previous years, it no longer works. You can't be that same type of manager and still be successful. It's not the 2010s anymore. Football has changed in terms of being able to have a type of manager where you can still be successful. And he could argue, yes, he wasn't given, I guess, maybe the funds to bring in the type of players. But if you want to look at the players that he's brought in, for Charleston, not the greatest. Yves Bissouma, definitely not the greatest. Like, he's had kind of misses in the recent transfer window. So if he's going to kind of look at somebody as someone that's kind of taking control holistically of a club, it hasn't worked out. And he, I feel like, shares a lot of blame on that. I do, of course, think that it does start with chairman on down, and maybe this level of embarrassment might reset Daniel Levy to have more of a kind of a project approach, similar very much to, over the last couple of years, Arteta with Arsenal and what we've seen thus far with Erik ten Hag with Manchester United. Tottenham right now, they're still in a top 4 position, right? That's from a starting point, that's just almost as good as you can really get to have a culture reset, which is I really feel like they need to have. Similar, like I said, to the Ten Hag kind of structure with Manchester United, where if we look a year from now, Tottenham still potentially in the Champions League, being able to bring in a manager, reset their culture, look at bringing in a couple of new players that through are going to be more successful, play more of a system football where they know what they're going to be able to get, versus kind of just looking at a manager with all the personnel in the world, does have a lot of pedigree, but it's not going to help them through a long-term kind of project. They've really only looked at managers since Poch as kind of short-term band-aids of let's get a trophy. That doesn't work. It's more, can we build a foundation and move forward from there to play successful football? And right now they're not doing that. I think the shout Gio kind of spoiled it earlier is Nagelsmann. It's a blessing in disguise because he's that type of manager. He was doing that at Bayern, and there's no reason why he can't kind of implement that with the Spurs team, where he brings in a couple of players, it changes the way that they're going to play, utilizes Kane in different sort of fashion, or Son in different fashion, where they're not just playing counter-attacking aggressive football, where they can be a little bit more kind of attacking. They can look at more intricate designs of how to potentially play. So I think that's a great shout. And I've heard reports that he just wants to take a break right now, which, if you're already receiving so much money from Bayern and you don't want to step into the hot waters of Tottenham right now, makes sense. Wait till the summer. But if they have enough time without an international tournament through the summer as well to really potentially look at a full reset, and still not be completely lost for the remainder of the season. But it'll be interesting to see how well they do for the rest of the season, though. So I think that's a fair question.
Hey, Spurs, you can do us Liverpool fans' favorite and just drop out of the top 4. I think it might be beneficial for you guys. Get a reset. Some players go away. A new manager. You don't get the pressure of the Champions League next season, and then just reset from there. But anyways, we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. Obviously, we are in the home stretch of the EPL season, and we'll definitely continue covering that. Again, this concludes our podcast for today. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. Our handle is @houseof_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email. houseoffooty@hotmail.com is our email. The next time you hear from us will be Friday when we preview the upcoming Premier League games for this weekend. And on that note, thank you, Mac.
If Tuchel loses to Man City and he gets fired, I hope Bayern have to pay 3 managers at the same time.
And thank you, Gio.
It's okay. It's okay, Nagelsmann. Just take your break, man. Don't go to Spurs. Don't go to Spurs.
And thank you guys for listening.